Captain Lee Daeho stood in the observation deck of the human embassy station, watching alien ships drift past like strange fish in the void. 3 years he had served as Earth's military representative to the Galactic Council, and he still found the sight unsettling. Ships that looked like giant flowers, others that seemed to be made of living crystal, and some that pulsed with biomechanical rhythms that hurt to look at. The emergency session alarm echoed through the station's corridors. Lee straightened his uniform and headed to the council chambers. Whatever was happening, it was big enough to call all 47 member species together on short notice. Ambassador Park Ji-won was already waiting in the human section when Lee arrived. She looked tired. The war news from the outer spiral had been getting worse every day, and the diplomatic pressure on humanity to get involved was growing stronger. "Any idea what this is about?" Lee asked, settling into his seat. Park shook her head. "Nothing official. But I've heard whispers that the hegemony took 3 more worlds last week." The council chamber was massive, built to accommodate species of all shapes and sizes. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and alien breathing gases. Lee had never gotten used to it. Elder Quindrel floated to the center podium, her insectoid wings buzzing with agitation. As one of the founding members of the council, her word carried enormous weight. When she spoke, her translation device made her voice sound like wind through metal tubes. "Fellow councilors, we face our darkest hour. The hegemony empire has conquered 12 of our member worlds in 3 years. Their bioships adapt to every weapon we use against them. They learn from every battle. Our fleets cannot stop them." A murmur went through the chamber. Lee had seen the battle reports. The reptilian hegemony forces were unlike anything the galaxy had faced before. Their ships were living creatures bred for war, capable of healing damage and evolving new defenses in real time. Councillor Vextara from the Crystalline Dominion rose from his perch. His body was made of what looked like living diamond, and his voice rang like struck glass. "The situation is indeed grave. We estimate 6 months before they reach the core worlds." "What do you propose?" asked a delegate from the Void Swimmers, her aquatic form floating in a tank of murky liquid. Elder Quindrel's compound eyes swept across the chamber. "We need fresh military assets, new tactics. The human homeworld has a population of 8 billion and significant industrial capacity." Lee felt his blood turn cold. He had been dreading this moment since the war began. Park stood slowly. The chamber fell quiet. Humans were still the newest members of the council, barely 2 decades since first contact. Many species still considered them primitives who had stumbled into space travel by accident. "Honorable councilors," Park began, her voice steady but firm, "Earth has observed galactic politics from afar for thousands of years, through our telescopes and deep space probes. We have seen how your wars unfold. We have studied the patterns. This conflict is not our concern." Councillor Vexitara's crystalline form flared with angry light. Typical response from the newcomers. "You think you can hide behind your single star system while civilization burns around you?" Other delegates began to speak at once. The thermal dancers, beings of pure energy, flickered with agitation. The hive minds buzzed in their collective language. The stone builders, ancient and patient, watched with eyes like granite. "Silence," Elder Quindrel commanded. The chamber stilled. "The humans will contribute forces to the war effort, or face complete economic isolation. All trade agreements will be suspended. All technology sharing will cease. Earth will be cut off from galactic civilization." Lee watched Park's face carefully. He knew what she was thinking. Earth needed galactic trade. The colonies on Mars and Europa depended on alien technology for life support. The orbital habitats around Jupiter used hegemony bioprocessing systems for food production. Economic isolation would mean the death of millions. "You are asking us to fight in a war we do not understand, using methods we have never practiced, against an enemy we have never faced," Park said. "You are being asked to fulfill your obligations as council members," Vexitara replied coldly. "Every species must contribute to the common defense." Lee stood up beside his ambassador. As military attaché, he had studied every major galactic conflict in recorded history. He knew how alien species fought their wars. Honor duels between fleets, formal challenges and responses, rules of engagement that went back millions of years, civilized warfare between civilized peoples. Humanity had no such traditions. If Earth contributes military forces, Lee said carefully, we will fight according to human military doctrine. Elder Quindrill's antennae twitched. Naturally, we do not expect you to match our advanced tactical knowledge immediately. Several delegates made sounds that might have been alien laughter. The humans were known for their crude, inefficient technology. Their weapons were primitive. Their ships were barely space-worthy compared to the elegant vessels of older civilizations. The vote was called. 46 species voted in favor of mandatory human military participation. Only Earth abstained. Park closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, her expression had changed. Lee recognized the look. It was the same expression his grandfather had worn when the old man talked about the wars of the 20th century. Very well, Park said. Earth will provide military assistance. We will deploy our forces under human command, following human military protocols. We will engage the hegemony according to human rules of warfare. Excellent, Elder Quindrill buzzed. How soon can you have forces in position? 6 months, Lee answered. We will need time to study the enemy, analyze their capabilities, and develop appropriate countermeasures. As the session ended and the delegates began to file out, Counselor Vexitara approached the human section. His crystalline features showed what might have been amusement. I look forward to seeing what the primitive apes can accomplish against the hegemony biofleets, he said. Perhaps you will provide a useful distraction while the real military forces develop a proper strategy. Lee met his gaze steadily. We'll do our best. After Vextara left, Park turned to Lee. You realize what we've just agreed to? I know exactly what we've agreed to, Lee replied. The question is whether they do. Outside the viewport, alien, ships continued their graceful dance through space, following patterns and protocols established over millions of years of civilized warfare. None of them had ever fought humans before. In 6 months, they would learn the difference. 6 months later, the human fleet arrived at Kalos Prime like ghosts from the dark between stars. General Kim Minho stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching alien warships through the viewscreen. The combined council forces looked impressive. Thousands of vessels in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with energy shields and exotic matter. The human fleet looked like scrap metal by comparison. Ugly little things, aren't they? Commented Fleet Admiral Zethkol through the communication channel. The Crystalline Dominion commander's voice carried obvious disdain. Are you certain those vessels are space-worthy? General Kim smiled but didn't reply immediately. Behind him, Major Choi Yu-jin was reviewing tactical data on her console, while Dr. Han So-young studied bio-readings from the approaching hegemony fleet. Commander Yoon Tae-sung coordinated positioning with the other human ships. The human vessels were indeed smaller and cruder than their alien counterparts. Earth's industrial base was still primitive compared to civilizations that had been building starships for millions of years. But they had been built with human engineering principles, and that made all the difference. Admiral Zethkol, Kim finally responded, I appreciate your concern. We'll try to stay out of your way. Through the bridge speakers, he could hear alien officers laughing on the open channel. The joke was spreading through the combined fleet, the primitive humans with their primitive ships, coming to fight an enemy that had crushed the greatest military powers in the galaxy. Dr. Han So-young looked up from her sensors. General, I'm reading the hegemony biosignatures now, just like the intelligence reports described. They're not ships in any traditional sense. Kim nodded. He had studied every piece of available data about their enemy during the 6-month preparation. Period. The hegemony forces were living creatures bred and grown rather than built. They could heal damage, adapt to new threats, and learn from combat experience. Every battle made them stronger and smarter. Against traditional galactic warfare, they were unstoppable. But humans didn't fight traditional galactic warfare. Contact from the Council Fleet, reported Commander Yoon. They're beginning their attack. Run. On the view screen, The alien warships moved into battle formation. It was beautiful in its way, geometric patterns that had been refined over eons of civilized conflict. Each species contributed their unique capabilities while maintaining overall tactical coherence. The thermal dancers provided energy weapon support. The void swimmers handled stealth reconnaissance. The stone builders anchored defensive positions. Everything by the book. Everything according to established military doctrine. The hegemony biofleet responded exactly as expected. Massive organic vessels that looked like diseased whales emerged from hyperspace, their hulls pulsing with alien life. Weapon ports that were actually orifices opened along their sides. Living plasma erupted toward the Council forces. The battle began. Kim watched the engagement through his tactical displays. Both sides followed predictable patterns. Advance, engage, fall back, regroup. The alien fleets traded volleys of energy weapons while maintaining formation integrity. Casualties were heavy but manageable. Honor was maintained on both sides. It was exactly the kind of warfare that had been practiced in this galaxy for millions of years. Major Choi, Kim said quietly. Begin Phase 1. Choi's fingers danced across her controls. Around the main battle area, human ships began to move. But they didn't join the formation combat. Instead, they scattered in seemingly random directions, breaking every rule of space warfare ever written. What are they doing? Admiral Zeth Cole's voice crackled with confusion. Their formation is completely broken. They'll be destroyed piecemeal. Kim didn't answer. He was watching Dr. Han's bio readings as the first human attack craft approached. The hegemony vessels. The hegemony bioships barely noticed the tiny human fighters. They were focused on the main council fleet, adapting their defenses to counter energy weapons and exotic matter projectiles. Their living hulls grew new armor configurations. Their weapon systems evolved to target specific alien technologies. They were learning and improving, just as they had in every previous battle. But they were learning the wrong lessons. The first human fighter reached the largest hegemony bioship and fired a single projectile. Not an energy beam or exotic particle stream, just a simple kinetic round loaded with Earth-manufactured chemicals. The projectile penetrated the bioship's hull and released its payload directly into the creature's circulatory system. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then the bioship began to convulse. Dr. Han had spent 6 months studying hegemony biology from captured tissue samples and battle recordings. She had identified the neural clusters that controlled pain response, the chemical pathways that managed fear reactions, the biological systems that regulated basic motor functions. The payload wasn't designed to kill the creature. It was designed to cause agony. The hegemony bioship's scream cut across all communication frequencies. It was a sound that had never been heard in the galaxy before. The death cry of a living warship, transmitted through bioacoustic organs that could reach across solar systems. Every other creature in the hegemony fleet heard it and understood what it meant. Pain. Unimaginable, incomprehensible pain caused by something they couldn't adapt to or defend against. More human fighters reached their targets. More bioships began screaming. The hegemony fleet, which had been adapting and learning and growing stronger, suddenly found itself facing an enemy that didn't want to destroy them, an enemy that wanted to hurt them. Impossible, breathed Admiral Zeth Cole. How are they doing this? The bioships should be adapting to their weapons. They are adapting, Kim replied calmly. They're developing resistance to the chemical compounds we're using. But that just means we switched to different compounds. We brought thousands of variations, Commander Yoon reported from his station. Sir, the hegemony fleet is beginning to retreat. Kim watched as the massive bioships turned away from the battle, their movements erratic and panicked. Some were still screaming. Others seemed to be trying to communicate with each other, but their bioacoustic systems were being jammed by human electronic warfare. In less than 2 hours, the unstoppable hegemony warfleet was fleeing the system in complete disarray. The Council forces floated in stunned silence. General Kim, Admiral Zeth Cole's voice was barely a whisper. What exactly did you do to them? Kim looked at Dr. Han, who was already preparing reports on hegemony biological vulnerabilities. Major Choi was updating tactical databases with new information about bioship neural systems. Commander Yoon was coordinating pursuit patterns to track the fleeing enemy. We studied them, Kim answered simply. Then we hurt them in ways they couldn't understand or prepare for. It's what humans do when someone forces us to fight. Through the communication channel, he could hear alien officers trying to process what they had witnessed. Species that had been fighting wars for millions of years, suddenly confronted with an approach to warfare they had never imagined. The humans hadn't tried to destroy their enemies. They had systematically tortured them into retreat using biological weapons that targeted suffering rather than death. The hegemony will regroup, warned Admiral Zethkol. They'll adapt to your methods. They'll develop countermeasures. Kim nodded. Probably, but we've already developed countermeasures to their countermeasures. And countermeasures to those. We've been planning for this possibility since you first told us about them. The general turned to his staff officers. Begin phase. 2 preparations. If the hegemony wants to continue this war, we'll show them what human beings are really capable of. As the human fleet regrouped and prepared for the next engagement, something had fundamentally changed in the galaxy. The council species were beginning to understand that they hadn't just recruited primitive allies. They had awakened something that thought about warfare in ways their civilized minds couldn't comprehend. And the war had only just begun. The Hegemony High Command gathered in their deepest biochamber, their massive forms coiled around the living walls of their flagship. Commander Vorthak's scales rippled with confusion as he reviewed the battle data from Kalos Prime. "Explain this to me again," he hissed to his tactical officer. "Our bioships are designed to adapt to any threat. They learn from every encounter. How did a primitive species defeat our entire war swarm?" The tactical officer's throat sacs pulsed nervously. "The humans didn't use weapons we could adapt to, Commander. They used pain, pure biological torment. Our ships couldn't evolve defenses against suffering itself." Vorthak's predatory eyes narrowed. "Then we will show them what real suffering looks like. Target their civilian populations. Destroy their colonies. Force them to surrender before they can use their torture methods again." The order went out across hegemony space. Bioships began converging on human settlements in the outer systems. But Colonel Beiji Hoon had been expecting this. From his command center aboard the UES Retribution, Bei watched the hegemony forces approaching the human colony of New Sol. The civilians had already been evacuated, but the aliens didn't know that. They were expecting to find defenseless humans to slaughter. Instead, they found something much worse. "Begin the transmission," Bei ordered his communications officer, Lieutenant Kang Hyewan. Across space, every hegemony bioship received the same signal. Not a radio transmission, but a direct neural interface that spoke to the living computers controlling their vessels. The message was simple and terrifying. "We know about the queens. In the deepest vaults of their homeworlds, the hegemony kept their most precious secret. The breeding queens who gave birth to all their warrior castes. The locations were hidden, protected by millions of years of evolutionary paranoia. But humans had been studying hegemony biology for 8 months now. They had analyzed tissue samples, communication patterns, genetic markers. Dr. Han So-young's team had mapped the hegemony reproductive cycle and traced it back to its source. They knew where the queens were hidden. "We know how your reproduction works," the message continued. "We know which pheromones trigger your panic responses. We know about the neural pathways that control your breeding instincts. We know about the genetic weaknesses you've hidden for 1,000,000 years." Captain Seo Minji's reconnaissance teams had spent months infiltrating hegemony space, not to steal military secrets, but to study their culture. They had learned about hegemony fears, their superstitions, their deepest psychological vulnerabilities. The messages weren't threats of military action. They were demonstrations of knowledge that should have been impossible for any outside species to possess. "We have already begun the process," the final part of the transmission revealed. "Check your bioship's internal atmosphere. Check your crew's hormone levels. Check your queen's reproductive cycles. On every hegemony vessel, medical sensors began detecting anomalies. Strange pheromones in the air, unusual bacterial colonies in the life support systems, microscopic organisms that hadn't been there yesterday. The humans hadn't actually done anything to the hegemony fleet, but they had made it impossible for the aliens to be certain of that. Commander Vorthak's claws scraped against the biometal walls of his ship. Scan everything, every air filter, every water recycler, every biological system. Find what they've done to us. But Sergeant Nam Woo Jin's teams had been much more subtle than that. While the hegemony forces had been focused on military targets, human infiltration specialists had visited hegemony worlds and introduced carefully designed microorganisms into their planetary ecosystems. Not weapons. The Geneva Convention still meant something to humanity, even in space. But Earth-based, bacteria and viruses that would interfere with hegemony biological systems in subtle, uncomfortable ways. The aliens' homeworlds didn't become uninhabitable. They just became wrong. Food began tasting different. The air carried unfamiliar scents that triggered ancestral fears. Plant life that had been perfectly adapted for millions of years started behaving in strange ways. Nothing died. Nothing was destroyed. But everything felt slightly poisoned, slightly dangerous, slightly not right. Lieutenant Kang Hai-wan continued her psychological warfare campaign, broadcasting messages directly into hegemony neural networks. False reports about human capabilities. Fake intelligence about bioweapons that didn't exist but sounded terrifyingly plausible. The humans have weaponized empathy, one false report claimed. They can make you feel compassion for your enemies. They can turn your protective instincts against your own species. Another message warned of genetic corruption weapons that could rewrite hegemony DNA to make them biologically incapable of violence. None of it was true. But the hegemony military command began requiring extensive biological screening for all personnel. Trust between commanders and crews started to break down. Every unexplained medical symptom became evidence of human biological warfare. Captain Seo Minji's intelligence teams fed this paranoia by planting false evidence of human infiltration, genetic markers that suggested human agents had been operating in hegemony space for decades. Communication intercepts that implied Earth had been planning this war since first contact. The truth was simpler and more disturbing. Humans had studied the hegemony for 8 months and developed a comprehensive understanding of how to hurt them in ways they couldn't fight back against. But the lies were more effective than the truth. Elder Quindrel called another emergency council session as reports came in from across the war zone. The hegemony fleet was retreating from human space, but their behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. The situation is spiraling beyond our control, she announced to the assembled delegates. The hegemony leadership is requesting negotiations. Ambassador Park Ji-won stood in the human section, her expression carefully neutral. What kind of negotiations? Surrender terms, Admiral Zethkol answered, his crystalline form flickering with disbelief. They want to discuss conditional surrender to prevent further human biological warfare attacks. The council chamber fell silent. In 3 years of war, the mighty hegemony empire had never even hinted at the possibility of surrender. Now they were begging for mercy after less than a year of fighting humans. What exactly have your forces done to them? Elder Quindrel asked. Park looked at the assembly of alien representatives, species that had been fighting civilized wars for millions of years, following rules and conventions that made conflict predictable and manageable. We fought the way humans fight, she said simply. We studied our enemy until we understood them, completely. Then we attacked their weaknesses using methods they couldn't defend against or adapt to. Counselor Vextara's voice rang like broken glass. You've turned war into something monstrous. There are rules, conventions, limits to what civilized beings do to each other in combat. You asked us to help you win, Park replied. You didn't specify how. The voting was swift and decisive. The council would accept the hegemony surrender and begin peace negotiations immediately. But as the delegates filed out of the chamber, they all carried the same terrible knowledge. They had seen what humans were capable of when forced to fight. They had witnessed methods of warfare that made their most advanced weapons seem primitive by comparison. The galaxy would never forget the lesson. Never drag humans into your wars, because they might decide to win them. The peace talks lasted exactly 1 day. Commander Vorthak arrived at the neutral station with the full authority of the Hegemony High Command. His delegation was prepared to discuss territorial concessions, reparation payments, and military restrictions. Standard terms for the end of a galactic conflict. Admiral Lee Subin represented humanity at the negotiations. She listened patiently as the Hegemony commander outlined his proposed surrender terms. "We will withdraw from all contested systems," Vorthak stated, his scales rippling with barely controlled pride. "We will pay compensation for damages to Council worlds. We will limit our military forces to defensive configurations only. In return, the humans will cease their biological warfare attacks and provide medical assistance for our affected populations." Lee Subin studied the proposal for several minutes. Then she looked up at the Hegemony commander with calm, dark eyes. "No," she said. The single word fell into the chamber like a stone into deep water. "I beg your pardon?" Vorthak's throat sacs inflated with confusion. "The terms are unacceptable," Lee replied. "You attacked human civilian colonies. You attempted genocide. Against our species, the war continues." Elder Quindrill's antennae twitched frantically. "Admiral, surely some accommodation can be reached. The Hegemony is offering complete capitulation." "They're offering conditional surrender," Lee corrected. "Those are different things." Within hours, the news spread across the galaxy. The humans had rejected peace. They were continuing a war against an enemy that was already trying to surrender. It made no sense by any standard of civilized warfare. But Major Yu Dae-young understood the logic perfectly as he coordinated the next phase of human military operations. The Hegemony had escalated to total war when they attacked civilian targets. By the rules of human conflict, that meant the gloves were off. His task force began implementing tactics that broke every assumption about space warfare. Human ships started using kamikaze attacks against Hegemony positions, but not out of desperation or honor. The suicide runs were mathematically calculated to maximize damage per unit cost. To the aliens watching, it looked like humans didn't value individual life. The truth was more disturbing. Humans valued individual sacrifice when it served the greater strategic purpose. Dr. Lim Yunha's psychological warfare teams escalated their campaigns beyond simple terror. They had spent a year mapping hegemony, social structures, learning how their civilization functioned at the deepest levels. Now they began systematically dismantling the hegemony's ability to exist as a coherent species. The attacks weren't physical, they were philosophical. Agent Park Hyun-woo had infiltrated the deepest levels of hegemony society, posing as a researcher studying ancient hegemony history. Through carefully planted documents and conversations, he introduced ideas that created cognitive contradictions in hegemony thinking, questions about the nature of their conquest drive, philosophical paradoxes about the meaning of strength and dominance, logical puzzles that, when contemplated by a hegemony mind, created psychological feedback loops their species couldn't resolve. The effect was subtle at first. Hegemony intellectuals began questioning fundamental assumptions about their society. Religious leaders started experiencing doubt about their most sacred beliefs. Military commanders found themselves unable to justify actions they had performed thousands of times before. Hegemony suicide rates began climbing as individuals became unable to reconcile their biological nature with the philosophical contradictions they were encountering. The Galactic Council watched in horror as intelligence reports came in from across hegemony space. The humans weren't just winning battles. They were performing cultural surgery on an entire civilization. President Moon Jae-in addressed the Council from Earth, his image transmitted across light years of space. The hegemony empire chose total, or when they targeted our civilian populations, he stated calmly. Under human military doctrine, that requires a total response. What does that mean? Elder Quindrill asked, though something in her voice suggested she already knew. It means we will continue until the hegemony empire no longer exists as a threat to anyone. Moon replied. Not just militarily, but culturally, psychologically, and biologically. Counselor Vextara's crystalline form flared with alarm. You're talking about genocide. No, Moon corrected. We're talking about evolution. Forced evolution. The explanation came from Dr. Kim Yu-jung, Earth's Director of Xenobiological Research. Her teams had been working on the project since the hegemony first attacked human colonies. We've identified the genetic sequences responsible for hegemony aggression, she reported to the council. The neural pathways that make conquest psychologically rewarding for their species, the hormone systems that drive their territorial expansion. What are you planning to do with this information? Admiral Zeth Cole asked, though his voice suggested he already suspected the answer. We're going to remove them, Dr. Kim replied. Not through violence or force, but through targeted viral therapy. The hegemony will retain their intelligence, their culture, their individuality. They'll just lose their biological compulsion to conquer other species. The council chamber erupted in shocked voices from dozens of alien species. The humans were proposing to rewrite the fundamental nature of their enemy at the genetic level. This is monstrous, Vextara declared. You cannot simply alter a species' basic biology because you find it inconvenient. We can and we will, President Moon replied. The hegemony made the choice to escalate to species-level warfare. We're responding in kind. General Ryu Junho provided the military timeline. Phase 1 of the biological modification program will begin in 3 weeks. We estimate full deployment across all hegemony populations within 6 months. And if they resist? Elder Quindril asked. They can't resist, Dr. Kim explained. The delivery system is already in place. We've been introducing the modified organisms into hegemony ecosystems for months. Every breath they take, every meal they eat, every surface they touch is gradually introducing the genetic modification sequences into their systems. The horror of it sank in across the council chamber. The humans hadn't just been fighting a Horpeusar. They had been preparing to fundamentally alter their enemy's species while pretending to negotiate peace. Commander Vorthak appeared on the communication screen, his scales now pale with terror. We surrender unconditionally. Complete surrender, no terms, no conditions, please, just stop. Admiral Lee Subin looked at the hegemony commander for a long moment. The biological modification process has already begun, she said quietly. It cannot be stopped or reversed, but we can ensure it proceeds painlessly. You're going to change what we are, Vorthak whispered. We're going to cure you of the biological imperative that makes you a threat to other species, Lee replied. Your children will be born without the neural structures that make conquest psychologically necessary. They'll be free to choose peace. As the transmission ended, the council delegates sat in stunned silence. They had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that approached warfare with such thoroughness that they could literally reshape their enemy's biology. The hegemony war was over, but the galaxy would never be the same, and, somewhere in the back of every alien mind was the same terrifying question. If humans could do this to the hegemony, what could they do to us? The hegemony invasion fleet arrived at Earth exactly as human intelligence had predicted. 10,000 bioships, the largest war armada in recorded galactic history. Commander Vorthak had gambled everything on one final assault, hoping to force humanity to reverse the genetic modifications before they became irreversible. Fleet Admiral Oh Si-hun watched the approaching swarm from the command center of Luna Station. The defense grid around Earth looked pathetic compared to the massive alien force. A few hundred human vessels and orbital weapons platforms against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. All stations report ready, his tactical officer announced. Broadcasting surrender demand from the hegemony fleet, the communications officer added. Oh Se-hun listened to Vorthak's ultimatum with grim amusement. The hegemony commander was offering humanity one last chance to undo the biological warfare attacks and negotiate a peace treaty. Tell them no, Oh Se-hun ordered. The battle began exactly 72 hours later. The hegemony bioships attacked in perfect coordination, their living hulls adapting to every weapon humanity threw at them. Human defense platforms died quickly, their primitive energy weapons unable to penetrate. Evolved alien armor, The orbital fortresses around Earth were swept aside like leaves in a storm. For the first 6 hours, it looked like the hegemony would achieve total victory. Then, Dr. Kim Yu-jung activated Protocol 7. From research stations hidden throughout the Sol system, invisible signals began broadcasting on frequencies that only hegemony bioships could detect. Not weapons or jamming systems, but genetic modification commands embedded in electromagnetic radiation. Every hegemony vessel was a living creature, and living creatures could be reprogrammed. The first bioship began convulsing as its DNA started, rewriting itself in real time. Genetic sequences responsible for aggression simply switched off. Neural pathways controlling territorial behavior began dissolving. Hormone systems that drove the urge to conquer stopped functioning entirely. Within minutes, the massive creature no longer understood why it was fighting. What's happening to us? Vorthak's voice crackled across the communication channels as his flagship began drifting aimlessly through space. You're being cured, President Moon Jae-in replied from his bunker beneath Seoul. The modification process we've been implementing across your species for the past year has reached critical mass. Your biological imperative for warfare is being permanently removed. The process spread through the hegemony fleet like a virus. But this wasn't death or destruction. It was transformation. The bioships didn't die. They simply lost the ability to comprehend violence as a solution to problems. Commander Vorthak felt his own mind changing as the genetic modifications took hold. The burning need to conquer that had driven his entire life was fading away, replaced by something alien and terrifying contentment. You've stolen our nature, he whispered. We've given you a choice, Moon replied. For the first time in your species' evolution, you can choose peace without it being a biological impossibility. Within 24 hours, the entire hegemony invasion fleet was requesting humanitarian assistance. The crews were experiencing severe psychological distress as their fundamental worldview collapsed. They needed medical care, counseling, and help understanding their new reality. General Ryu Jun-ho coordinated the relief effort as human ships moved among the disabled biovessels, providing aid to their former enemies. Any hegemony crew member requesting asylum will be granted safe passage to designated refugee colonies, he announced. We will provide medical support and psychological counseling for all affected individuals. The transformation wasn't limited to the fleet. Across hegemony space, entire populations were experiencing the same genetic modifications. The warrior caste that had dominated their civilization for millions of years was becoming biologically incapable of aggressive behavior. It was the end of the hegemony empire in every sense that mattered. Elder Quindrel called an emergency council session as reports came in from across the galaxy. The scope of what humanity had accomplished was becoming clear to all member species. You've changed them at the genetic level, she stated, her compound eyes focusing on Ambassador Park Ji-won. Yes, Park replied simply. An entire species. Billions of individuals. You've rewritten their fundamental biology. The modifications are limited to aggression and territorial behaviors, Park explained. They retain all other aspects of their intelligence and personality. They'll live normal lives, but they'll never again be capable of waging war. Counselor Vexus Tara's crystalline form flickered with something that might have been fear. What gives you the right to make such a decision for another species? They attacked our civilian populations, Park answered. Under human military doctrine, that constituted an attack on our species' survival. We responded appropriately. By committing genocide? By preventing future genocide, Park corrected. The hegemony will continue to exist. They'll continue to develop their technology and culture. They'll trade with other species and explore the galaxy. They just won't be able to conquer anyone ever again. President Moon addressed the council directly from Earth. Effective immediately, all former hegemony territories are under human protection, while transition governments are established. We estimate 50 years to restore the ecological damage they caused to conquered worlds. What about the former hegemony citizens? Asked a delegate from the Void Swimmers. They'll be relocated to suitable habitats and provided with all necessary resources, Moon replied. Many are already expressing interest in peaceful occupations they never considered before: art, philosophy, scientific research, cultural exchange. General Mayor Ryu provided the final military briefing. Human forces will remain in the region for the next century to ensure stability and provide assistance where needed. The threat posed by the hegemony empire has been permanently neutralized. As the briefing ended, Ambassador Park stood to address the Council one last time. This concludes humanity's military service to the Galactic Council. We hereby resign our membership and withdraw from all mutual defense agreements. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. You cannot simply leave, Elder Quindrel protested. There are procedures, obligations. We fulfilled our obligation, Park replied. You asked us to help win the war against the hegemony. We won. Now we're returning to our previous policy of non-interference in galactic politics. Counselor Vexitara's voice rang with desperation. But what if another threat emerges? What if some other aggressive species begins conquest campaigns? Park looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of 47 different civilizations. Every one of them was now acutely aware of what humans could do when forced into warfare. Then I suggest you handle it yourselves, she said, quietly. And I strongly recommend you avoid dragging humanity into future conflicts. As the human delegation filed out of the council chambers, they left behind a galaxy that had been fundamentally changed. The most aggressive military power in known history had been neutralized not through destruction, but through forced evolution. And every species in the galaxy now understood the price of awakening humanity's approach to warfare. 3 years later, human merchant ships traded peacefully throughout the galaxy. Human scientists shared medical knowledge and technological innovations. Human artists and philosophers contributed to galactic culture. But in research facilities throughout the Sol system, humanity continued to study the biology, psychology, and social structures of every known alien species, not out of hostility but out of thoroughness. Because somewhere in the depths of human military planning, contingency protocols existed for every possible scenario. Plans for what to do if any species ever made the mistake of threatening humanity again. The galaxy had become a remarkably peaceful place since the end of the Hegemony War. Everyone agreed this was a positive development. No one was entirely sure whether they should be grateful or terrified. The warning had been given, demonstrated, and proven. It spread through the galaxy in whispered conversations and official diplomatic cables, becoming the most important rule in interstellar relations. The Galactic Council was warned, never drag humans into your wars, because they might decide to win them permanently.